this point, we both realize that any alien who is going to invade the Earth is going to use rocks as weapons, unless they've got something even better. So giant meteoroid impacts are going to be a part of this novel. And that's the way we outlined it. We sent in a detailed outline for Footfall, and the response from Bob Gleason was, forget the aliens, do the giant meteoroid. Okay, we're not amenable. We say yes a lot. We look the situation over, and if it's going to be a giant meteoroid impact, I wanted it to be a comet. Asteroids aren't as easy to see. If you can see it coming, it's a lot more dramatic. So it's going to be a comet. I was right, by the way, in another sense. It's, what, 40 years later? We've learned a lot about asteroid impacts, meteoroid impacts, comet impacts, makeup of comets and asteroids, location of thousands of them. And one thing we know is that you can't stop a comet. You can stop an asteroid by changing its course, but a comet's course is wobbly. It's as if you had a rock covered with attitude jets. The jets are inside it, and as the comet warms up, you get a blast here, and it's on a slightly different course, and a blast here, and it's on a slightly different course. And the result is, if you try to alter the course of a comet, you're likely to alter it so it hits the Earth. The good news is the danger is about 1%. 99% of the danger is from asteroids. We have concepts about how to deal with that. Just a diversion. Lucifer's hammer derived from the comet, and we had to do very little research once we had our goal. Given that we both knew everything there was to know about comets. Jerry did some driving. He drove the fire trails around Los Angeles to get our characters out of the area. And it displeases me to tell you that we had to put in some extra roads to make it work.
Well, I think if that thing was coming, I might make a road.
Yeah, given the right vehicle.
I think that Lucifer's Hammer is interesting too, because it was really before a lot of the disaster movies and books and things that we got later in the 70s or into the 80s. It was like an Irwin Allen movie in a book, you know. And it kind of, in a way, predated, I guess, The Stand, which is kind of, you know, and then later The Postman and other post-apocalyptic things like that. You guys are kind of...
In fact, the postman, there's a postman in Lucifer's Hammer, Harry the Mailman. And David Brin, who wrote The Postman, swears he didn't borrow it from Lucifer's Hammer. And hell, coming up with two writers coming up with an idea simultaneously is a common thing. There's a beanstalk in Arthur Clarke's novel, the Towers of Heaven.
Oh, Fountains of Paradise.
Fountains of Paradise, thanks. And in another guy's, which came out about the same time, with Arthur's statement that the idea had not been stolen. It was that close. So I'm willing to believe David. David tells me from time to time that I keep coming up with ideas just before he gets there.
I was just going to do this ring. So you ended up doing Footfall and Oath of Fealty later.
Footfall and Lucifer's Hammer. Yeah, that's exactly true.
So you did Lucifer's Hammer, and then you were able to go back and do Footfall, the original idea.
Yeah, we finished Oath of Fealty after saying, when are you guys gonna do football? And I thought it over and said, well, given we're working on other things, it'll be about 5 years. And I hear this choking sound from behind me. And he says, I saw my whole life pass before me. You know, none of us like that kind of delay. We're all getting older and it feels like it.
So you decided to take the core concept of football and use it as the core technology, as the core of Lucifer's Hammer.
Yeah.
So what made you guys decide to go back and do the football story the way you originally intended to after all?
It's still a good story.
Yeah.
Nothing about the story had changed. It was just a matter of nerving ourselves to do 2 novels about a giant meteorite impact. And all that takes is arrogance.
When you look back on the 2, what do you think in terms now, about how they hold up and everything, and how you react? I mean, do you feel like do you love one more than the other, for example, or do you feel
these are the best stories we've done, and each of them was the highest paid advance in the science fiction field at its time, rapidly overtaken by Arthur Clarke and Robert Heinlein each time. But they had that mark. Football, they paid us more money, but we haven't earned out the advance even yet. So I think I like Lucifer's Hammer better.
Well, I guess the last thing we'll see in the second half here what the audience wants to ask you, but I'm also curious because I really enjoyed Dream Park, and that struck me also as timely. You're talking about sometimes these books come along when there's like a demand or there's an audience waiting for something like that, like with Alien Invasion or the Meteor.
It was timely. There were people waiting in the wings who braced us after the book came out and asked if they could borrow our terms, International Fantasy Gaming Society and Dream Park. We had to trademark those terms in order to loan them out. And it generated a subculture.
So they actually trademarked, the things in Dream Park are actually trademarked as if they were real...
Yes, trademarks may have lapsed, but they were in use at the time.
And it just seems like that was something at that time, like the idea of like almost like Fantasy Island or mixed with live action role playing, and I guess you mixed an actual murder mystery into it too,
yes.
Right? And all that.
Murder mystery within a fantasy, within a science fiction story.
Did that come about because you were playing role-playing games or interested in role-playing games?
I've been introduced to role-playing games. I played a little. Also computer games, of course, but that isn't live role-playing. And what I was introduced to wasn't live role-playing. It was sitting around a table talking.
Okay, well, let's see if you guys have some questions for Larry, if we can hear you. Yes, Joker.
Yes. Quite a lot. Nitpicking stuff. We called an Admiral Kutuzov. There's a Russian named Kutuzov, and it's fairly famous to Russians. Robert suggested, as long as it's not that well known in America, why not just use the name Kutuzov, make him a descendant? We did that. He took the concept I had invented, Crazy Eddie. Crazy Eddie is a myth among Modis. Crazy Eddie does stupid things at just the wrong time to bring down a civilization. When the cities are clogged with a huge population that can't seem to go anywhere, that's when the garbage. That's when Crazy Eddie leaves the garbage garbage collectors out on strike. Robert looked at Crazy Eddie and said, "It's wrong, though. You'll confuse the reader. He'll think that Crazy Eddie is a person, human. Change it to something screwy." And I wrote a detailed, diatribe. I told him he was mistaken, and I told him why he was mistaken. And for years, I thought I'd won the argument. Eventually, I raised the subject, and he said, "No, I just gave up." I'm still sure I was right. On that in that one respect. In every other respect, oh, by the way, I don't know why this is by the way. It's the most important thing Robert said to us on that first pass. And it was the most important thing our agent, the Plexico, said to us. Both said the same thing: chop off the first 100 pages of the book. And we did that. And had to reintroduce all the characters. And reintroduce see, Terry had written a battle scene in which you don't know who's playing and you're looking at the wrong side. And I looked at that and thought, this won't work. We're going to have to introduce the book first some other way. So I wrote a prologue. Then Lurton and Heinlein spoke up, and we saw they were right, and we chopped off the first 100 words out of pages. Then we had to reintroduce everything, including what I'd introduced with the prologue. I got it into a scene visiting the Church of Him, who believed that that God's vision was the coal sack, including including the Murchison's eye for an eye, and a little yellow dwarf that shows the flaw against it, and flares up sometimes. Where was I?
Were there anything else that Heinlein suggested that you felt like you needed that you changed? You were just talking some specifics.
Let's see. Yeah. And again, he wasn't the only one who said so. We needed to go through that book and chop out a few words each page. We were wordy. Jerry was wordy and I was wordy at the time, and we both taught ourselves how to chop out unnecessary verbiage. That's what I mean when I say I'm a minimalist. We chopped from well, including removing the opening, both openings. We chopped the book from 250,000 words to 170,000 words. And that's what you saw. And you saw a little more if you saw an article in Galaxy magazine on building the mote in God's eye, which included a lot of my prologue.
Let me ask you this in a moment, since that came up again. We haven't really talked about oath of fealty, and that was kind of a different thing for you guys, because you were doing a lot of sort of things from space come to Earth, like the meteor, the aliens, or God's eye going out into space, dealing with aliens that I assume if they'd gone crazy would come and invade the Earth or something. But then oath of fealty was almost more like ecological, sociological. Where did that come from, and what got y'all thinking about the arcology and the big city and all that? I wasn't curious about that.
Terry had a little list. We were just getting used to collaborating together. We've done 2 books, including Inferno and Mote. Jerry had been making a list of expected advances in the future, the near future. Coffee pots that did coffee better than you're used to. Things that actually happened, including that one. We looked through that list, and it included this arcology design, 2 miles by 2 miles by 1/5 of a mile high. I looked that over, and I put in air wells, and I put a diving board at the edge of the roof.
Yeah.
Because that 8 miles of sheer wall is going to attract all the suicides in America and from parts further away. You'll get a lot of Japanese tourists. Jerry designs something huge and cumbersome, and works out the details of how to make it work, economic and so forth. Jerry knows a lot of sciences, particularly economics, particularly psychiatry, military, political. And he was Mayor Yorty's political advisor when Mayor Yorty was winning. So he knows a lot about Los Angeles. It was that list that generated Oath of Feeling. And me with my deliberately crazy